It has been 2 months since my last tier list video, and some of the meta has changed a little bit along with some new towers, so let's rank every tower in the game once again. Starting off with this tier down here, I do not really use these towers, so I cannot really rank them confidently. Especially stuff like the top path mobster and sentries. I just will be honest, I've never touched those towers in my life, so I don't think I can rank them. Next up, we have the F tier with both sniper paths and the top path mine layer. The top path mine layer is just not good, and the sniper tower is just so outclassed nowadays when put up against other newer towers. Next up is these towers that all sort of just have their own niche use. What I mean by this is that the bottom path shotgunner can be useful with his unstun ability, and I did actually use him a lot during the tower battles event to unstun XWM turrets during void stomps, but other than that I could not think of other times I used him. Toxic Nader's like 20-second long poison just doesn't fit most playstyles. Bottom path Grenadier has some nice stuns, but there are a lot more slowing and stunning options nowadays. And the Scarecrow is literally made just to bait, which is obviously a pretty niche use, which it can excel in, but cannot find the opportunity to most of the time, being just a waste of a tower slot. Next up is the sort of mid towers in the D tier. They do have a clear usage unlike the niche towers, but they are not great in it. The bottom path patrol boat I used to love, but its range is just really bad compared to the top path, along with there being way more crowd control options now. The top path shotgunner I did also use a lot in the tower battles event for crowd control, but other than that, I have not used it since. And the bottom path missile trooper just feels outclassed to its cost efficient top path, the javelin. Next up in the C tier, our towers start to actually get pretty solid. The top path patrol boat is an amazing option for water focused maps. The ghost operator is super consistent and has shown its potential in events like the tower battles event. The top path missile trooper feels pretty similar in consistency and usage to the top path operator. The top path grenadier is a nice crowd control option for beginners or impossible maps. The laser gunners can still do really good at what they're meant to do, but their purpose has kind of been left out along with getting outclassed over time. And the bottom path mine layer serves as an easy option for beginners to take down big bosses for the first time, or you can even use it to kill assailants in Nonus mode when you do not have golden mine layer or other options to kill them. Now, in C tier, the towers are pretty solid, but now let's get to the actually, starting to get good stuff in the B tier. The bottom path Cryo Blaster I almost put in meta, but honestly, it just fell short to me. Its super high freezing is really useful on impossible maps, and the extra time to thaw is really nice when you're trying to freeze bosses as well. The bottom path Slammer is a nice crowd control and stun option, and I made an entire video on the top path golden mine layer that you can check out later. The Z has fallen off a little bit, but it honestly is still a good tower, especially at max level. Ghost bottom path is still good, but simply not as good as its top path. The top path railgunner is a nice spammy DPS option, and its bottom path is really good for taking down bosses from a distance when attacks really focus on close range. The juggernauts both are nice spammy DPS options like the top path railgunner. Bottom path John is insanely cost effective for its crowd control and bullet piercing capabilities. Top path John has its nice range ability and some decent DPS uses as well. Both barracks paths are really good for recent events and just casual gameplay in general. The artilleries fill in their crowd control and manual targeting roles really nicely, but are not necessarily the best at their role anymore with other crowd control options and manual targeting with helicopter. And finally, the armored factories are just your standard, good and consistent spawner towers to use. The B tier stuff is not necessarily at the level of the A tier stuff though, which are all used super frequently as what I would like to call the meta. In the meta, let's start with strong with the bottom path helicopter. The bottom path helicopter is really cost efficient, can reveal stealth at max level, has stealth detection, and can pretty much substitute artillery's manual targeting role with its own manual targeting system that also has infinite range. I mean, helicopter is just an amazing tower. And so is the Slammer, which is simply the stunning meta, along with having nice early game and crowd control for impossible maps. Commander is a really good support with the 30% damage buff, and its super cost efficient APC and airstrike abilities. Mobster has tons of money making potential, and Xmas Chapter 2 Nightmare showed us how its life insurance is good as well. Top path Ghost is just so cost efficient and useful with its stealth revealing. Flame Trooper has really good crowd control as seen in Xmas Chapter 1 Nightmare, along with a 20% damage buff towards all small mobs. Icebreaker is really good for impossible maps and allows you to freeze literally every boss in the game, which honestly almost made me put it in the OP tier, but I just decided not to. The Relic is just a really nice source of true raw damage in both the early game and late game, but not so much mid game. The bottom path golden mine layer lets you create a good safety net for your defenses, which helps immensely on assailants and impossible maps, and that does not even scratch the surface of its other uses, like helping to stun bosses. Both Golden Ranger paths are just so good for every mode of the game, with the top path Golden Ranger being seen a ton in recent events as just a spammy DPS option, and the bottom path helping with stuns and whatnot. The EDJs are pretty self-explanatory. 40% damage buff and 30% off discounts are pretty much essential for using any tower in the game that can be buffed. The farms are a staple to the game just like the EDJ, giving essential cash consistently throughout the match, being able to use the bottom path for more early to mid game usage, and the top path for late game million-dollar money making. The medics before I would have put in maybe the good B tier, but with the events just emphasizing more and more need for the medic, it might as well be in the meta A tier by now. The warships are really meta for endless mode, and whenever there's water you pretty much always want to use them, as we saw with the Tower Battles event, when warship was used at just a glance of water being on their event maps. But sadly not all maps have water and it is pretty expensive, so it is just not always available. Then you have the XWM turrets, just gods of consistency and survivability, but not really excelling at cost efficiency or raw DPS. And finally, the Toxicnator, which maybe I would put in B tier because the 10% damage buff to bosses is not always that major, but thanks to the Cryo Heli, it is able to give an extra 14% damage buff now, which motivated me to just bump it up a little more to the meta, and that does not even count how much it's able to give to mobs too, not just bosses. With most of the towers out of the way now though, I only have 4 left that I think are the most OP in the game. These are the Cryo Helicopter, Top Path Helicopter, and both Golden Juggernaut paths. The Cryo Helicopter, simply put, I think is possibly the best tower in the game right now. It can freeze enemies really quickly, including most bosses. It gives a 40% damage debuff to anything it does freeze, and even if it doesn't freeze anything, right now it is bugged to kind of flash the 40% damage on and off of the enemies, which maybe is like a 15% extra damage buff. And it also synergizes with other damage debuffers like the Toxicnator and Flame Trooper, allowing you to get 54% extra damage on bosses, and up to, from what I've seen, 82% more on enemies. The Cryo Helicopter just lets you deal so much more damage, along with clumping up enemies and completely bringing them to a halt as well. The Cryo Helicopter is simply OP. And on the theme of helicopters, I believe that the Top Path Helicopter is also quite overpowered. Look, even when John makes attacks specifically handcrafted to shoot these things down, people will still use the helicopters. We can see this on Halloween Chapter 2 when the engineer is made to counter helicopters, but guess what? We still used it anyways. On Christmas Chapter 2 Nightmare, there was tons of air counters for the helicopter, but guess what? Helicopter is still used. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. This thing has infinite range, explosive type damage that ignores explosive resistance, which is something not many towers are capable of. It has high DPS, it can be used for early game of events and endless, all the way to the very final wave, and the only thing really holding it back is just the placement limit, but even then it is still just such a good tower. Now I am not saying this is a bad thing, because look, this is literally the second most expensive tower in the game. It deserves to have this much power, I'm not going to lie. I don't know about the Cryo Helicopter though, that might need a nerf. And along with expensive towers, I also put both Golden Juggernaut paths on here. Literally the most expensive tower. The Golden Juggernaut sure might not be usable in some of the base game modes, but nobody is playing those modes anyway. Like if you have Golden Juggernaut, you're not playing easy, intermediate, and elite, okay? The modes that they are playing are expert, endless, and events, and in all of those, the Golden Juggernaut is insane. Its DPS is the highest in the game when you have it buffed up. It can be healed by medic, which makes it a hard meta for events, as seen in Christmas Chapter 2 Nightmare, and in this event it is used to spawn kill General Selgar, which lets you skip the most annoying part of him, aka the shield regen. If you look at most endless runs, Golden Juggernaut ends up being spammed. In events, Golden Juggernaut is mostly spammed as well. An expert maybe not so much, but it is still very much so viable there, and on impossible maps it is quite important as well, with its system reboot ability that lets it unstun itself after bosses use their stun abilities. So, enough yap, there it is, the complete tier list. Let me know what you agreed with, or disagreed with, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out guys, have a good day.